I have a lot of conversations with my university students about how to organize their practice time. Because if you can make a really good practice plan and practice efficiently, then you'll learn music so much faster. It is a lifetime's journey to learn how to practice effectively. I myself have been practicing and playing the piano for many decades. I don't even want to say how many. And I have learned tactics over the years that have really helped me improve my practicing and be more efficient. So let's talk about that in this video. Tip number 1 is to be intentional. Take a moment before you start to center yourself, turn off your phones, banish the dog to the other room, turn off the TV, and give yourself the opportunity to really reflect on the fact that you're about to do something quite extraordinary. You're about to make music, you're about to play an instrument and do something that is beautiful and that allows you to really strive to be your best self. I always encourage my students to create a practice ritual for themselves. A practice ritual is a series of steps that you take every time you sit down to practice that helps prime your mind to concentrate. It helps prepare you to focus. I have a practice ritual that I have evolved over the years. It's very simple, but it always allows me to make that transition from the busy, hectic email world that we all live in to one where I'm able to focus and shut that out to an extent. My practice ritual is pretty simple. I start off by pouring myself a glass of water. Then I make a cup of tea. I turn off my phone unless I'm using it as a metronome, in which case I put it on airplane mode. I get out my practice journal and then I look and I see what I am planning to do for that session. And then I take a moment and I take 3 deep breaths in order to focus my attention and shut out the rest of the world. And then I start practicing. You can develop your very own practice ritual. First, think about all the things that you need to have at arm's length when you practice. That's why I have my water and my tea and my practice journal. Second, think about the things that you need to power down or shut out in order to focus most effectively. And you can experiment with this over the period of days or weeks until you come up with the thing that you can reliably do every single time you sit down to practice that then primes you to concentrate and focus. My second tip is to make a practice plan. You really do need to have a system, and this is something that you can develop and evolve over time. The first thing you're going to want to do to make that system is write down everything you need to learn and the date that you need to learn it by, and that's going to be your master list. Then work backwards from there to set some benchmark goals, and when you practice, use those benchmark goals to help guide what you're going to do each day. At the end of the day, write down what you accomplished so that the next day you can hit the ground running and pick up right where you left off. Working this way allows you to maintain some flexibility and figure out what you actually can do in a day versus what you expect to do in a day and bring those two things closer together. There are a lot of really good resources about practicing. One that I want to share with you today is called The Musician's Way by Gerald Klickstein. He has so many really helpful practice suggestions throughout this book. He has many chapters just on practicing deeply and how to set up your practice environment for maximum efficiency. A resource like this can be really helpful as you set up your own system for practicing and see what works the best for you. Tip number 3 is schedule your practice time. If possible, practice at the same time every day. This helps prime your brain to be in learning mode when that time of day comes around. Look for the times of day when you learn the best. For me, the early morning is the absolute best time to practice, and I try as hard as I can to reserve the early mornings for practicing. Once you get used to practicing at the same time every day, then it becomes easier to settle in and concentrate because that's part of your routine. When you're scheduling your practice time, break up your practice time if possible. Instead of practicing for one longer period of time, have shorter sessions that you do throughout the day. This is a more effective way to learn and retain the things that you're doing in the practice room. As you're practicing, make sure you take brief breaks and you do things like get up and you stretch and you breathe, you drink some water, you have some tea, do things to kind of mentally and physically take those breaks. The most important part of scheduling your practice time is to protect your practice time. It's so easy to disrespect the commitments we make to ourselves and to think that if it's only practice time, then that time's available for meetings or rehearsals or just other things that other people are asking us to do. So my advice to you is treat your practice time like you would treat a meeting or a rehearsal with another person. You would never just blow it off or say that something else had come along. Nobody else is going to protect your practice time for you. You have to do that for yourself. So schedule your time as if it was a commitment that you've made to somebody else, and then protect it by not scheduling other things during that time. My fourth tip is to practice daily. Make time for your instrument every single day, because that leads to really visible results and it leads to increased motivation. Not only that, but try to practice a similar amount every day. Don't practice just a little bit one day and then a whole lot the next day, and then maybe skip a day and then cram and play a whole lot the next day. That can lead to injury, and it also creates a feeling of chaos in your brain. Instead, just try to practice a consistent amount every day at approximately the same times when possible. If for any reason you had to take an extended break from practicing, for example, if you were on a trip, or if you're coming back from an injury, or if you had a big project that just made it impossible to practice for a while, then don't just jump right back to the amount of practice that you were doing before, because that can lead to injury. Instead, ramp it back up. Practice a minimal amount for a few days in a row, and then gradually increase that length of time until you get back to the place you originally were before you took that break. My fifth tip is don't cram. Learning music takes time. It takes time to get it into your short-term memory, and then over time, transfer it into the long-term memory. The only way to do that is frequent, repeated exposure. As soon as you get a new piece of music that you know you're going to have to learn, start working on it right away. Don't procrastinate it or put it off, because that is going to cause discomfort later. Cramming is something that causes a lot of physical and emotional discomfort. I've had quite a few students who've left things to the last minute, and they're trying to cram for a performance that's coming up, and it really stresses them out. It causes a lot of anxiety. It causes a lot of physical tension as well, because the anxiety makes your body kind of seize up as you practice. It also can cause very ineffective practicing, because you get into panic practice mode when you're cramming, and that means you're not doing enough slow practice, you're not doing enough careful practice, and you're learning things superficially. So cramming is something that pretty much guarantees you're going to learn something superficially and not as deeply as you need to or want to feel comfortable on stage. And then that can have a whole series of knock-on effects where you have a bad performance experience because you just didn't feel ready. Not feeling ready causes more performance anxiety when it comes to the concert time than if you had learned something over a longer period of time, because you know that you just haven't had enough time with the piece. There's nothing worse than walking out on stage, and as you walk out on stage feeling like, oh, I wish I knew this piece better. I wish I'd had more time to practice it. So my message to you is don't cram. Start a new piece as soon as you get it, and be aware of the amount of time that you have between that moment and the final performance so that you can make appropriate benchmarks in your practice system. Tip number 6 is learn to focus. When you practice, if you want to accomplish anything at all, you need to be able to focus your mind and your attention for an extended period of time without being distracted. In today's world, when we have cell phones with notifications and bells and whistles around us at all times, it can be really hard to focus. And that's why I recommend powering down your phone when you practice in order to minimize that. Sometimes it can be difficult to focus when you sit down and you get all settled into practicing, and then you remember something. Has that ever happened to you? It happens to me all the time, where I'm sitting down, I'm practicing, and then I remember, oh, I didn't write back to so-and-so, or I needed to take care of this thing, or I just wanted to look this one thing up. What I do in order to prevent myself from popping up off the piano bench every 5 minutes when I'm practicing to do these little things that come into my head is I have a piece of paper and I keep it on the piano. And then as I practice, when something occurs to me that I need to do or remember or attend to, I write it on that piece of paper so that by the end of my practice session, I have a little list of small things that I can quickly take care of when I'm finished practicing. That allows me to get it out of my head and not think about it while I'm practicing. And it also allows me to know that I will eventually be able to take care of it when I'm done practicing. If you're not used to focusing for long periods of time, your thoughts might wander during a practice session, and this is perfectly normal. The way around that is not to force your thoughts not to wander, But the way around that is to employ a mindfulness technique where you notice your thoughts when they wander, and then you bring them back to the thing that you are concentrating on. So if you're practicing and then you all of a sudden notice that your thoughts have drifted along to your upcoming birthday celebration, then just acknowledge that and then bring it back to the thing that you're working on. Over time, if you repeat that, your ability to concentrate and focus will definitely improve. One way to really help your ability to focus is make sure the thing you're doing at the piano in that practice session is not too easy or too hard. If it's too easy and not challenging you in any way, then your attention is likely to wander. If it's too hard and it's overwhelming your ability to break it down and learn it, then it's also likely that your attention will wander because of how difficult it is. You need to find that sweet spot where something is just the right level of challenge, but not too hard or not too easy. Ideally, when we practice, we want to reach a state of flow where we lose track of a sense of time and we are transported by the process of practicing itself. The concept of flow was popularized by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi in a book called Flow. If you want to learn more about this idea of flow as applied to piano playing, I would recommend this book by Thomas J. Parente called The Positive Pianist. He takes the concepts of flow and applies them to piano playing. He has a lot of very helpful suggestions about mindfulness and being present and centered and ways to get there, techniques to try. My seventh tip is perhaps the most important one of them all, and that is appreciate yourself. Playing an instrument and getting better at it is really an infinite game. There's never a point where you reach and you say, okay, I'm good enough, because there's always another peak to climb, another distance to strive for. As a result, it's very important that you appreciate yourself in the hard work you're putting in every day at the instrument. At the end of a practice session, at the end of a day of practice, look back on what you've done and appreciate that. Honor yourself for the work you've done. Honor yourself for the attention that you brought to the work at hand. Even if you didn't accomplish everything that was on your list to practice that day, let that go. Look at what you actually did accomplish and then think ahead to the next day and where you want to start. What I do in my own practice journal is I'll write down what I did, and then I'll write NA for next action, and I will write down the next thing I'm going to do on that piece the next time I sit down to work on it. And then that allows me to hit the ground running the next time I come back to it, and it allows me to appreciate where I've gotten the piece to already by that point. One really effective way to wrap up your practice day is to reserve 5 to 10 minutes at the end of your practice day for some mental practice. That simply means taking your score away from the instrument and going through it, imagining the music in your head while following along in the music. This can be a wonderful way of consolidating all the work you did that day and preparing yourself for the next day's practice. Throughout this video, I've talked about keeping a practice journal. I've kept a practice journal myself for many decades, and I recommend that to all of my students. If you want to learn more about how to start and keep a practice journal, you want to check out this video right up there where I go through that in detail. Remember, appreciate yourself and all of the good intentions that you bring to your piano practice every time you sit down at the piano. I'll see you in the next video. Happy practicing!